I'm WG and this is a CZN character showcase. 9 days, it's all that's left. Some of you might even say it's just 8 days and a couple hours, and that is if we go by the date that the limited playtest went live. That was around, if you're talking Europe time, around 2 in the morning, so like 2 past midnight. So you could say it's like 8 hours and a little something. But that's besides the point, because today's topic is Magna. Magna, the counter specialist. So as usual, let's go into the combat motions. So, if you look at all the details of all the cards and the like throughout this trailer, you won't really notice any differences when it comes to cost or ult cost for her cards, or even the way they behave. It all seems pretty similar to what we had during the limited playtest. But then again, keep in mind there is no 100% guarantee that nothing has been changed, nor to what degree. So here we are with Magna. Magna, the 5-star Vanguard of the Justice attribute. Vanguards are your frontline unit with more of a focus towards shields and survivability, but in comparison to other games, they do also pack a punch and can potentially even be your main DPS. Overall, Justice element just means that she deals more damage to enemies weak against Justice, as well as more damage to set enemies' tenacity bar. Here we have her skills. Important to note here, due to me playing her rather extensively during the limited playtest, we have the potential upgrade 1, as well as a 20% additional multiplier to her base cards, which is something you can get really easily, and that's why the values are 120 and why every single attack has the counter attack mechanic, and that is because the potential one gives the freezing fist as well as double frost shield, the counter attack perk. Before we go fully into her kit, there is 3 specific things we need to talk about. First off, the counter attack mechanic. When you take damage, you inflict defense based damage at 100% on the attacker, so 100% of your defense value. If the attack is completely blocked by a shield, so if you have a 50 shield enemy does 40 attack, you survive without taking damage, you deal 150% instead, and counter attack goes down by 1 when you get attacked by an enemy. Now the important part here though is attack instances are counted separate. An attack that has 4 hits you 4 times, gets countered 4 times, but only consumes 1 counter attack stack. So only separate attacks from separate enemies or separate turn attacks do actually reduce the counter attack meter. So if there's 4 enemies and one by one they attack you, it costs you 4 stacks, but if one enemy attacks 4 times, it gets countered 4 times and only consumes 1 stack. And that's truly where you really see the power of the counter attack. Then we have the crystallization mechanic, which is a buff that you find mostly on Magna and then on specific normal cards or monster cards, which are separate cards you can put into a character's deck to broaden that, but we'll get into that closer to game release. But what that does is that at the end of the turn you gain a 20% fixed shield based on every single crystallization stack, so 2 are 40, 10 would be 200. And then we have the vulnerable mechanic, where damage taken increases by 50%, and when you trigger this damage increase, you reduce the stack of vulnerable applied to the enemy by 1. So those are the 3 you should keep in mind, bringing us to then the first skill. Lead tag, meaning if you have this card on hand, 50% chance for the cost to go down by 1, which would make the Ice Fragment a 0 cost free to play ability. It's a upgrade card, meaning you play it and then you don't get it back throughout the fight, but it stays kind of like a passive for the whole duration of the fight, and then if you go into a new fight you would have to play it again. What this does is it gives you the 2 stacks of crystallization, meaning that for the whole duration of the fight you'll always have at minimum a 40% shield, and then at the start of the turn, which would then be for the next turn, you would also gain 1 counter, so you always have 1 counter and a 40% shield due to Ice Fragment. Glacial Iron Fist deals 150 defense based damage, and then you gain a shield equal to 50% of damage dealt, so the conversion would for example be 75% of your defense as a shield. Then we have Ice Wall, which has a cost of 2, same as Glacial Iron Fist. 2 cost cards are somewhat rare in that most cards tend to be between 0 and 1 cost, but overall it also has the benefit of triggering the Celestial mechanic, though the question is how important will that be after all. But there is the synergy between Magna and the free character Amir in that you always get a shield, meaning you can trigger the metallization with crystallization, and then you'll also be able to trigger the celestial spells with your 2 cost cards. But yeah, what you do is you do 100% shield, gain counter 2, so 2 stacks of counter, and this is very nice. For 1 turn, counter applies to all enemies. What that means is if you get hit and Magna counter attacks, she's going to AoE counter attack rather than just single target. So if there's 3 enemies and they all attack you, you hit every single enemy 3 times rather than everyone 1 each. Frost Charge is the, I guess you could say, legendary skill where you get a 100% shield and you apply 2 stacks of vulnerable to all enemies, with then the identity card being a upgrade card called Storm of Bitter Cold, where you have the lead effect once again with the ability to potentially at a 50% chance reduce the cost from 2 down to 1, and when gaining a shield from a card you gain counter 1. So whenever you gain a shield from a card, there you go, you then have counter 1. Bringing us to the very first, or I guess the ultimate before we get to the Epiphanies, which is 200% defense based damage, reducing your counter by 5 and increasing damage by 20% equal to that amount. So what that means is if you have a counter of 10, you go down to 5 and you add 100% to it. If you only have a counter of 3, you still reduce it by 5, so going to 0, but you only increase the damage by 60%. So now that we have all these debuffs and the like out of the way, what makes Magna Magna are obviously with every character the Epiphanies. First off, the Ice Fragment just increases the crystallization to 4, which is not that crazy. Then you have the crystallization 2 at the start of the turn, gain counter 2 instead of counter 1. The Outbreak of War, meaning you have it guaranteed in your hand at the beginning of every fight, and it's also reduced down to a 0 cost with still the same effect. Then the fourth one, which increases the cost to a 2 but has the unique tag. Unique tag meaning you cannot copy this card. At the end of every chaos run, which is how you build your deck, you'll always have the ability to copy a specific card so that you can have a card twice in your deck, but unique cards are excluded from any copying mechanics, usually hinting towards this being a very strong effect. And that is the same true here, in that you gain crystallization 2 and then at the start of the turn you deal defense based damage to all enemies at 300%, and that's going to happen every single turn, though you don't get any counter stacks through this ability at the start of the turn anymore. And then with the last one, counter 4 and increases next counter damage by 30%, overall being the weakest. The interesting cards here are definitely the Outbreak of War, meaning you'll always be able to play it for every fight and also cheaper, and then the fourth upgrade with the 300% damage, whereas the other ones are a bit more on the minor side when it comes to importance. Glacial Fist here is just a straight up damage increase to 220%. This one is a slight damage increase, but you lose the extra shield gain, though you do apply 3 stacks of vulnerable. The third one is then you deal 150% damage, or better said, everything stays the same, but you reduce the cost. For the fourth one, you deal 150% defense-based damage to all enemies, still the shield. So if there's more enemies, you get a bigger shield, even though the damage multiplier stays the same. And then for the last one, damage stays the same, but the conversion to shield gets increased to 100%. Overall, there is a couple interesting ones, but especially if you don't bring a source of AP, so yeah, attack point or action point generation, which are the ones you use to cast these cards with the cost at the top, you really kind of want to go for the middle one, because you can then just get it out nice and cheap. If you know you're facing a bunch of enemies, specifically also if you know that you're going to fight a boss that has a bunch of minions or summons a bunch of minions, the fourth upgrade is really nice, and then it's just any of the first one or the fifth one as kind of like side upgrades that do similar things. Bringing us to my absolute favorite card in the game during the limited playtest, and this was the Ice Wall upgrade number 3. But for now, let's check out the other ones. So you gain a 150 shield, a counter of 3, and for 1 turn counter applies to all enemies. Alright, you gain a shield at 100%, gain counter 2 for 1 turn, counter applies to all enemies, but a cost reduction of 1. And now this one, think about the potential. At the start of the turn, gain crystallization 2. That's the first effect. And then counter applies to all enemies. So every single counter Magna does Magna will attack every single enemy, and you will gain 2 crystallization. Now, the very fantastic part, and I hope the devs haven't realized it or haven't given it the unique tag, is that this crystallization doesn't disappear. It stacks. So for your first turn after playing this card, you get a 40% shield. For the second turn, you get a 80% shield. For the third turn, you get a 120% shield. For the fourth turn, you get a 160% shield. So every single turn, the shield you gain at the end of your turn increases by 40%. And that also ties in with the fact that this card does not have the unique tag. So you could, in theory, get this third upgrade. I know it's only a 1 in 5, but you do get a 3 out of 5 choice every time you get there. So usually every second run you'll be able to find it. So you could get this card, play a run, get to the end, clone the Ice Wall, place Ice Wall twice, and all of a sudden every single turn the shield you gain at the end of your turn increases by 80%. 80, 160, 240, 320, 400, 480, 560, and the shield just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and you don't have to spend a single AP on it. And yeah, so this was one of my main things I had fun with, which was building a whole bunch of shield for free. But yeah, so then we have the attack, the attack card, gain 100% shield, and then deal damage to all enemies equal to shield owned. So the higher the shield you have to you using this card, the more damage it will deal. And then the Ice Wall, the last one, it just gives you the counter effect to all enemies for 2 turns. And even if you don't rely on the shield, this counter effect stays permanent. You don't have to play it ever again, whereas this one is just 1 turn and the last one is just 2. Then we have here the last upgrade, the Frost Charge, where you gain a 150 shield and you increase shield gained by 50% per enemy. So if there's 5 enemies, you get a 200% extra shield, meaning 350 total. At a 1 cost. For the other one, you just reduce the cost from 1 down to 0. The middle one gives you vulnerable to targets hit by counter. So pretty much every time you hit someone with a counter, you apply 2 stacks of vulnerable to them, which can be quite a lot, especially if an enemy hits you 4 times a single one, then that enemy gets 8 stacks of counter, which is kind of ridiculous and makes this third one in the middle pretty attractive. And then for the fourth one, you deal defense-based damage to a random enemy at 180% times 3, so 540% damage, and then you apply vulnerable to the target struck. Decent enough, and also can be very potent single target wise, with the last one applying 2 vulnerable to all enemies and then giving you 2 stacks of counter attack. So with those, we are through on Magna's standard kit. We've already talked about her potential one that gives you a counter 1 to both the basic attack and the basic shield, bringing us to the you gaining a second copy. So the Storm of Bitter Cold is the identity card, and at least during a limited playtest, once you gained a second copy, you got the lead tag added. So Interestingly enough, I managed to pull Magna twice, which is why this card doesn't look very dissimilar from what we had before, but the only change is that you get a lead tag added, which is on the weaker side when it comes to A1s. Then we have the A2, and that is a Magna's counter inflicts 1 freeze on the target. Freeze when taking damage from Magna's attack card, adjacent monsters take defense-based damage at 200%. So overall, I also don't know how high you can stack it, but you should probably be able to stack it infinitely. So let's say you counter someone, and also keep in mind, this whole thing becomes AoE, right? If the counter is AoE, you also apply freeze AoE, and that just means that if you use a Magna attack card, adjacent monsters then take AoE freeze damage, which then also goes vice versa. And yeah, so that's the freeze effect on having a third copy. Then we have a fourth copy, and that is the upgrade to the ultimate, where you did 250% damage, so 50% more, reduce the counter by 5, and then deal up to 150% extra damage if you can reduce 5 counters, giving you 400% total. And then from the A4, it goes into the I guess from the A3, the fourth copy, into the A4. And that is Magna's counters no longer reduce vulnerable. So counters do reduce vulnerable, the stack that says increase damage taken by 50%. But with this one, every single counter will take or will deal 50% increased damage so long as there is a stack of vulnerable on the target. Then the fifth one, or I guess the sixth total copy, the A5, is going to be a 6% increase to every single multiplier of every single card used by Magna, which is similar to a 4-star, but 5-stars only have one of those. And then the A6, or the 7th copy total, the final upgrade for Magna, Liberated Memory. At turn start, you gain 1 enhanced counter, and the enhanced counter just does 50% extra damage. Remove enhanced counter upon activation, and you can have up to 2 instances of the enhanced counter. The enhanced counter should also work like a normal counter in that if you block it with the shield, it's gonna do even more damage, but overall it's nothing too crazy. I gotta be honest with you here, you might have also caught it, but I am by far the most excited about the third card and the potential to just get way too many instances of shield and just tank everything and anything. So yeah, overall, Magna can very well run with someone like Emir, and you can also then pair up with so for example, a team that's possible is an Emir, Magna, Luke. So the reason why Magna and Luke is because Luke also has shields in his kit. He can also generate some extra shields. You have shields gained here, and then that would allow Emir to trigger her metallization. But we still have to see if Emir actually got a buff, a change, or if she stayed the same, because she wasn't the strongest character during the limited playtest. So yeah, Magna overall, you can pretty much slot her into any team you want. She can reliably give you shields, increase your survivability that way, and counters are always nice. So with that, we wrap up the Magna showcase, giving us only 8 days until release. And if you want to see a 5-star before anybody else, let me know who, and we shall do him next. Peace!